Ciao everyone, this is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the press and if it's an enemy of the people or not. President Trump has not made his dislike of the press unknown or subtle. During the 2016 campaign and after he took office, he popularized the term fake news in describing the media and even called them the enemy of the people. This naturally caused a strong reaction among the press, which probably reached a head at the end of July when CNN's Jim Acosta went to Tampa, Florida to cover a Trump rally. And some of President Trump's supporters there booed Acosta and told him to his face that his network sucks. Acosta declared on Twitter that during the event he felt like he was no longer in America, and the press raised the hue and cry. The Boston Globe actually coordinated over 200 newspapers to publish editorials simultaneously on August 15th to defend itself. Many of these editorials follow the same beat. The Tampa Bay Times and the Valencia County News Bulletin both argued that the press couldn't possibly be enemies of the people because they were the people. Shopping in the same stores, living in the same neighborhoods, eating in the same restaurants, and having the same worries and concerns like college and retirement as non-journalists. The New York Times and the Dallas Morning News both said that a free press is necessary for the survival of a free and democratic society. The Dallas Morning News even brought in the Founding Fathers, saying that the reason that the founders enshrined freedom of the press in the First Amendment was because they understood that tyrannies try to control the flow of information. Which ironically means that the founders were so wise that their reasons for protecting freedom of the press in the First Amendment are still relevant today and need to be remembered, but at the same time they were so racist that any statues and memorials to their memories have to be taken from the public square. Now, it is true that President Trump does sometimes go overboard in his comments, and his calling the press the enemy of the people might be one of those occasions. After all, it does lump together everything from the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune on one hand to the small, rural, local, and probably weekly newspapers somewhere in the Midwest, which may not like the New York Times itself all that much. And it is true that a free press is necessary for a free and Republican society to survive, where the people are supposed to be in charge, at least in theory. After all, how can we the people actually govern ourselves if we don't have the facts from which we can make decisions? And if the government or any other entity controls the press, what guarantee do we have that the facts that we're given are actually true? Some people might think that this scenario where the government or some other entity controls the press with an iron fist can only happen in, say, George Orwell's 1984. But the truth is that there are real places where this has happened, one of them being the former Soviet Union. Ilya Feoktistov, in a piece for The Federalist, recounted that when he started the 5th grade in the Siberian city of Tomsk, in the twilight of the USSR, his history teacher told him in his class point blank that she had nothing to teach them because the history books they had were worthless because they were full of lies. Dr. Piers Brendan, in his book, The Dark Valley, A Panorama of the 1930s, writes that Soviet students often went without textbooks because the Communist Party was constantly rewriting what was in them. So yes, a free press is necessary for a free society to survive. But as Shakespeare would say, therein lies the rub, because it is also a fact that the press is biased towards a particular worldview. The Tampa Bay Times and the other newspapers may have made a big deal about being part of their communities, being one with the people, but there's a big difference between being part of a community in New York City or Chicago or Philadelphia and being part of a community somewhere in flyover country. And that part of the country is still not really understood by the press. John Cass of the Chicago Tribune writes that the press still does not understand the 63 million Americans who voted for Trump in 2016. And former NPR CEO Ken Stern said the same thing in the New York Post. And being in that bubble makes the press bias against things and people which think contrary to how they think. John Cass, again, in his piece in the Chicago Tribune, says that journalism in America starts on the left and then proceeds just to move more to the left. And we can see that this is actually factually true. Two studies from the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy on Harvard University, not exactly a fortress of right-wing politics or conservative thought, discovered that during the 2016 campaign, the press covered Trump more negatively than Hillary Clinton, and that the press covered Trump more negatively in his first 100 days of office than they covered Presidents Obama, Bush, and Clinton in their first 100 days of office. According to the second report, the one about the 100 days, quote, there was not a single major topic where Trump's coverage was more positive than negative, unquote. Regardless of what the issue was, the press consistently gave out stories that put Trump and his administration in a negative light. Only Fox News came close to an even divide between positive and negative coverage. If you would like to read these reports for yourselves, and I highly recommend it, they are fascinating, links to both of them are down in the description below. And we don't even have to rely solely on these studies. There are several flesh and blood examples that demonstrate this bias of the press. The media, for example, ridiculed Agricultural Secretary Sonny Perdue when he was nominated to that position because he led a prayer for rain when he was governor of Georgia. Just recently, Senator Richard Burr, who is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee investigating claims of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, announced that after 19 months of investigation, there is still no factual evidence that any collusion took place. And the Associated Press headlined that story by saying, AP interview. Top Republican says Russia probe difficult. The fact that after 19 months there is still no factual evidence of any collusion was buried down in the fourth paragraph of the story. And this leads to another question. Is the press today even in fact free? Well, it depends, I guess, on how we define what we mean by freedom. If by freedom we mean that the press is not under the control of the government or any other outside entity, then yeah, the press is still free today. But if by free we mean that the press is free from interior constraints like its own bias, its own point of view, its own worldview, then the answer is no. But Nate, everybody has bias, and that's true. But the job of a journalist and of the press is to just report the facts and then to let the people come to their own conclusion. Maybe you can't free yourself completely 100% from your own bias. But a good journalist, like a good historian, a good lawyer, a good scientist, a good teacher, has to be able to remove himself from his bias. He has to be able to step out of his own bias so that he can understand and appreciate points of view that he doesn't agree with, so as to be as objective as possible. But the press isn't doing that. They're doubling down on their own point of view and then reporting their point of view as if their point of view is the only fact, as if that is the only way that the facts can be interpreted. So when Trump calls the press the enemy of the people, it resonates with half of the American population who see this unhidden bias on full display day in and day out. Even if the press isn't plotting to overthrow the government, the fact that they have allowed their bias to reach this stage means that they have failed in their job, which was to objectively report the facts and news stories to the people. If the press doesn't want to be labeled enemy of the people, they're going to have to admit their own bias and then do their best to step outside of it while they're on the clock. People really don't ask for much, and honesty will go a long way in helping to repair this distrust that has grown between people and the media. But what say you? Does the bias of the press enslave it to its own POV, which then prevents it from actually doing what it's supposed to do? Or, since bias is a natural part of life, are they just being true to what they genuinely believe and think? As always, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. Well, that's all for right now, gang. If you enjoy this video, whether you agree with me or disagree, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel and ring the bell for notification. I post new videos like this every Tuesday. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all again here next week on Top of the Stone. Ciao.